Messerschmitt Bf 109. Design and development. In 1923, Wilhelm Emil Willy Messerschmitt graduated from the Munich Institute of Technology. At first, he built sailplanes, but within 2 years progressed via motor gliders to small-powered aircraft, sport and touring types. In 1933, he designed a low-wing four-seater monoplane, the M37, better known by its later Reich Aviation Ministry RLM designation, Bf 108. Subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. In March 1933, the RLM published the tactical requirements for a single-seat fighter. The Rüstungsflugzeug 3 project for single-seat fighter was intended to develop a short-range interceptor replacing the Arado AR-64 and Heinkel He 51 biplanes then in service. In 1934, Messerschmitt incorporated many advanced design features of his Bf 108 into the Bf 109. It has been suggested that Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, BFW, where Messerschmitt worked, was originally not invited to participate in the competition due to personal animosity between he and RLM director Erhard Milch. However, recent research indicates such may not have been the case, as all three competing companies, Arado, Heinkel, and BFW, received the development contract at the same time. In February 1934, each was asked to deliver 3 prototypes for head-to-head testing in late 1934. The first prototype, Bf 109, flew in September 1935, powered by a Rolls-Royce Kestrel 695 horsepower engine because suitable German aircraft engines were not yet available, development having been hindered by the Versailles Treaty. Follow-on prototypes used several other engines until Messerschmitt and the Air Ministry settled on the Daimler-Benz DB600 series inverted V liquid-cooled engine. In 1936, the Bf 109 won the RLM's fighter contest. From the inception of the design, priority was given to easy access to the power plant, weapons, and other systems, as the aircraft operated from forward airfields. To this end, the entire engine cowling was made up of large, easily removable panels, secured by large toggle latches. A large panel under the center of the wing could be removed to gain access to the L-shaped main fuel tank, sited partly under the cockpit floor and partly behind the rear cockpit bulkhead. Smaller panels gave easy access to the cooling system and electrical equipment. Messerschmitt correctly determined that the military demanded wing load of 100 kilograms per square meter was wildly low and would produce a plane too slow for combat purposes. He instead opted for a load of about 200 kilograms per square meter. The Bf 109 had a wingspan of 32 feet 6.5 inches, stood 8.5 feet tall, and had an empty weight of 7,055 pounds. A fighter was designed primarily for high-speed flight. A smaller wing area was optimal for achieving high speed, but low-speed flights would suffer, as the smaller wing would require more airflow to generate enough lift to maintain flight. To compensate for this, the Bf 109 included advanced high-lift devices on the wings, including automatically opening leading-edge slats and fairly large camber-changing flaps on the trailing edge. Production and problems. In February 1937, the assembly lines in Augsburg made the first examples of the Bf 109B version. The new fighter's first public demonstration took place at the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. But the airplane's first real impact on the aviation world came during the International Flying Meet in Zurich in the summer of 1937. 5 Bf 109s took part and demonstrated outstanding climbing, diving, and maneuverability along with exceptional speed. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was the first truly modern fighter. With its all-metal stress skin construction, mono-wing design, enclosed cockpit, and retractable landing gear, it had no equal. It was the fastest military plane in the sky for 6 years, until another German plane, the Focke-Wulf Fw 190, supplanted it. Because of the large ground angle caused by the long legs, forward visibility while on the ground was very poor, a problem exacerbated by the sideways opening canopy. This meant that pilots had to taxi in a sinuous fashion, which also imposed stresses on the splayed undercarriage legs. Pilots who were mostly used to low wing loading, low ground angle, and open cockpit biplanes had trouble adjusting to the 109, which was essentially the opposite of what they had used previously. Ground accidents were a problem with inexperienced pilots, especially during the later stages of World War II, when pilots received less training before being sent to operational units. At least 10% of all Bf-109s were lost in takeoff and landing accidents, 1,500 of which occurred from 1939 to 1941. The aircraft was often nicknamed Messer by its operators and opponents alike. The name was not only an abbreviation of the manufacturer, but also the German word for knife. In Finland, the Bf-109 was known as Mersu, though this was originally and still is the Finnish nickname for Mercedes-Benz cars. Soviet aviators nicknamed the Bf-109 the skinny one, Kudoi, for its sleek appearance compared, for example, to the more robust Fw-190. Total Bf-109 production was 33,984 units, of which 30,573 were produced during World War II, September 1939 to May 1945. The Bf-109 accounted for 57% of all German fighter types made and 47% of all German aircraft production. Armament. The Bf-109 armament was placed in the fuselage. This kept the wings very thin and light. 2 synchronized machine guns were mounted in the cowling, firing over the top of the engine and through the propeller arc. An alternative arrangement was also designed, consisting of a single autocannon firing through a blast tube between the cylinder banks of the engine, known as the Motorkanone mount in German. When it was discovered in 1937 that the RAF was planning 8-gun batteries for its new Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire fighters, it was decided that the Bf-109 should be more heavily armed. The problem was that the only place available to mount additional guns was in the wings. Only one spot was available in each wing, between the wheel well and the slats, with room for only one gun, either a 7.92mm MG-17 machine gun or a 20mm MGFF or MGFFM cannon. From the 109F series onwards, guns were no longer carried inside the wings. Instead, the Bf-109F had a 20mm gun firing through the propeller shaft. The change was disliked by leading fighter pilots such as Adolf Galland and Walter Ussel, but others such as Werner Mulders considered the single-nose mounted gun to compensate well for the loss of the 2 wing guns. In place of internal wing armament, additional firepower was provided through a pair of 20mm MG-151-20 cannons installed in conformal gun pods under the wings. The conformal gun pods, exclusive of ammunition, weighed 298 pounds, and 135 to 145 rounds were provided per gun. The total weight, including ammunition, was 215 pounds. Although the additional armament increased the fighter's potency as a bomber-destroyer, it had an adverse effect on the handling qualities, reducing performance in fighter versus fighter combat and accentuating a tendency to swing pendulum fashion in flight. Initial combat. The first active service of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 came in mid-1937 when dozens of the fighters, including the A, B, C, D, and E variants, joined the German Condor Legion in support of Nationalist forces in the Spanish Civil War. The Bf-109 quickly replaced the Heinkel He 51 biplane fighter, many of which had been lost during the first 12 months of the conflict. The Republican fighters, mostly Soviet-supplied Polikarpov I-15s and Polikarpov I-16s, were no match for the Bf-109 and suffered heavy losses. As many as 20 Bf-109s were lost in aerial combat and to ground fire in Spain. At the outset of World War II, the Bf-109 provided air support during the invasion of Poland. it entirely outmatched the Polish PZLP-11, which just a few years previous was considered to be one of the world's most advanced fighters. The British Supermarine Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane were the first aircraft to seriously challenge the Bf-109. The Spitfire was slightly faster and definitely more maneuverable, but its performance at altitude was inferior. There was little difference in piloting skill between the Luftwaffe and Royal Air Force (RAF), but during the Battle of Britain in 1940, the RAF had the advantage of usually fighting over friendly territory. The Bf-109's limited fuel capacity reduced fighting time over Britain to about 10 to 20 minutes. Like most 1930s monoplane interceptors, it was designed to engage enemy bombers over friendly territory, and the range and endurance necessary for escorting long-range bombers over enemy territory was not required. Some Bf-109 pilots exhausted their fuel and crashed into the icy waters of the English Channel. In August 1940, comparative trials were held at the Central Luftwaffe Air Test Facility with leading Luftwaffe ace Werner Mulders as one of the participants. The tests concluded that the Bf-109 had superior level and climb speed to the Spitfire and Hurricane at all altitudes, but also noted the significantly smaller turning circle of the British fighters. Wide-ranging service. In addition to its well-known and highly effective use by German pilots against American and British fighters and bombers against Soviet forces on the Eastern Front, the Bf-109 was flown by pilots from Germany's allies, Italy, Romania, Finland, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Hungary. The aircraft operated from the Italian bases of Aviano and Osapo, and many were produced under license by the Hungarian Messerschmitt factory at Győr. The Hungarian 101st Home Air Defense Fighter Wing, commanded by the experienced Eastern Front veteran, Major Heps Aladar, was known as the Red Pumas after its insignia. During the so-called American season, from May to August 1944, the 101st claimed 15 US P-51s, 33 P-38s, and 56 four-engine bombers. But Hungarian losses were high too. 18 fighter pilots lost their lives. The heaviest losses occurred on August 7, 1944, when 18 Bf-109s from the 101st, along with Luftwaffe Bf-109 G6s, armed with additional cannons and underwing gondolas, intercepted 357 four-engine American bombers escorted by 117 fighters. The escorting P-51 Mustangs shot down 8 Hungarian and at least 9 German Bf-109s, losing just 2 of their number. Among the killed Pumas was Lieutenant Laszlo Molnár-Lukács, the top-scoring Hungarian pilot to date, with 25 kills, including 7 American aircraft. A total of 162 Bf-109Gs were purchased by the Finnish Air Force. The first landed in Finland on March 13, 1943, and eventually 159 were taken into service, but 2 G6s and 1 G8 were destroyed en route to Finland. The Finns scored 667 confirmed victories with their Bf-109s, while losing just 34 to enemy fighters or anti-aircraft fire. A further 16 were lost in accidents and 8 were destroyed on the ground. 23 pilots were killed. Bf-109s remained in foreign service for many years after World War II. The Finnish Air Force did not retire theirs until March 1954. Romania used its Bf-109s until 1955, and Switzerland used its 109Gs well into the 1950s. A Spanish-produced variant called the Hispano flew even longer. Some were still in service in the late 1960s. If you like these types of videos, subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. For more interesting military history content, check out our video library.